I'm pleased to welcome back to the podcast my guest today. He's making more appearances on this podcast than Tom Hanks on Saturday Night Live. We first met in the very early 1980s when he was working on his master's in Canadian history at Wilfrid Laurier University, and he was a teaching assistant for my Canadian history elective. Since that time, he's stayed active on the local political scene in Waterloo Region at all levels. He's worked for ministers in federal politics. He's worked for a provincial member at Queen's Park. He was a municipal councillor and has worked for the region of Waterloo. And he's even worked for a local school board. He also spent time as a consultant at a public relations firm. Today, however, we're going to be focusing on his time as a member of the Fourth Estate, when he helped create and edit a local community newspaper in the city of Kitchener. It was 1995, a dynamic time in our local regional history, and as you will soon hear, he built one heck of a local weekly. Today, I'm pleased to welcome back the former editor of Kitchener This Week, my friend, Bryan Stortz.
Thanks, Rob. Great to be here.
Hey, I was going to ask you, whether you worked for a religious organization to cover it off, but then I guess that's indirectly covered from your time at the Waterloo Region Catholic School Board.
I think that ticks that box.
Yeah. So, Bryan, we're here today to talk about, it's got to be your favorite topic, right? I mean, talking about this newspaper.
Yeah, it's near and dear to my heart. It's something that kind of, it was a very special time, and having, in preparation for this conversation, gone through the papers. I haven't looked at them for a while. It brought back a lot of good memories.
Well, you were kind enough too to send me a copy of I'm just borrowing from you this bound copy, and I'm going to hold on to it maybe for another month or so, because just going through it is just so fascinating to read about the people, some of them who are still politicians today. No comment about incumbency and all of that, but it's really funny. I mean, I really enjoying it. It's a real treat to be going through that stuff. I mean, it's I think it speaks to how important it is to have sort of these these documents. I'm assuming this is in the library or something. I mean, these sort of documents that are available for people to review.
Yeah, I believe it's in KPL. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be. I mean, if anyone's ever wanting to have a real treat and spend an afternoon going through something, I would say go find the Kitchener This Week bound edition of all the papers, because as we're going to sadly hear, there's only one bound about 3 inches thick, and there's no more than that.
Yeah, no, I think we didn't get tired, put it that way. I think we had a really good run.
Yeah, no, we didn't get tired. We got retired involuntarily. Okay, so let's talk about this. So, you've been on the show. We've talked about a bunch of things. We talked about your time as a communications director and the things you did at the region. We last talked about your time as a counselor. So, you're doing the 2 terms. And am I right in saying you stopped being a counselor because you were taking a run at the provincial nominate, or you got the nomination, but you ran in the provincial election? Is that kind of?
Yeah, that's correct. I was nominated, I guess, in advance of the 85 election, in advance of the municipal election. And I just felt it wasn't appropriate to be, running for 2 offices at the same time. So I opted and plus 6 years on council, I thought was, I really enjoyed that time. And, it seemed like a natural break point.
Yeah, so it's 2 points I just want to touch on there. Yeah, so it's the 95 provincial election. Lynn McLeod was the leader, right, at that time?
She was.
Yeah. And you mentioned a really good point about the 6 years on council was a really long time. I spent 4 years on council, and I always said to people, I said, well, look, if I'm on a volunteer organization, and if you're heading a volunteer organization, like you're the president, like you're the mayor, and you're 4 years in that spot, that's a long time to be president of some voluntary community organization, and you move on to let other people step in. Now, obviously I would have loved to have continued because the job was just so much fun, but it can demand a lot of your time. And if you're in another career or doing other things, you can't do both. So you just have to kind of take that step away. And so people will be all like, well, you got to run for 2 terms. You got to do, I don't agree with that. I think you spend the time you need to, you do what you want to achieve, and then move on or step aside and let some other people with fresh ideas come forward. I guess this is sort of the incumbency argument that we're putting forward here.
Yeah, no, I think there's no one size fits all
Right.
path for politicians. And, again, someone like Chair Sealing's, the reason we had such success was because of his, leadership and continuity. It's sort of ironic that when I stepped aside and chose not to run in '94, that my successor was Karen Redmond, and she's done okay. So, there is a time, and
so it was an upgrade. Okay, yeah.
It's an upgrade, yeah.
So she took over for you, and I couldn't beat her. So she's obviously the people's choice.
Yeah, I won't go there.
It was a good campaign. It was clean. Marcus to Queensbury rules. Everything was above board.
No, you did a great job.
So you're okay. So now you're running. Okay, so so the paper wasn't even a twinkle in your eye at the time that you were a provincial candidate, right?
No, it wasn't. I think I heard towards the end of the election, but you're so focused on the day-to-day campaigning that there was this, proposed newspaper coming to Kitchener, but I barely, was barely aware of it. And I can flash back to, the election of '95 and the outcome. So if obviously I did not plan to be unsuccessful. I planned to be successful. So I really didn't have a plan B. And I recall waking up the day after the election, and I think I was, because of the stress and all the campaign, I was down to like about 110 pounds. I was pretty wasted from the campaign, and I was laying there thinking, oh my God, what do I do now? So I did what all candidates have done in the past, and you've done, which is take down your own sign. So I was doing that and kind of licking my wounds a bit. And then I got a phone call.
I just want to say that the morning of, I got car sick as we were driving around taking out signs. It was a hectic night when you win. There's a few things going on that kind of go into the wee hours. But anyway, and you got to get your signs down right away. That's the only thing.
Yeah, you do, and sadly, it's if you're unsuccessful, it's a bit of a solitary task. But anyway, now we've been there. But following the provincial election, I again didn't have a plan B, and I got a phone call out of the blue from a longtime acquaintance and friend, Paul Winkler, who was the president of the Fairway Group, the family of papers locally. And Paul was a good guy, and he phoned up, and I was getting a lot of phone calls, people just saying nice things. And Paul said that he was quite surprised on election night and at the outcome, and he was sitting with his wife watching the coverage, and he said, we're launching a paper in Kitchener. Bryan's our editor. Would I be interested in being the editor of a startup community weekly newspaper in Kitchener? And and it was like, I didn't really have anything else to do, and plus it really intrigued me. So so I said, I'm interested. So we went off, and I had breakfast with Paul and his brother, Peter Winkler, who was the publisher. He was with Cambridge Times, and Peter was moving into Kitchener, who would be running the paper. And Peter, I think, was kind of, or wondering what his brother was doing to him, offloading this politician who had, I think I ghostwritten one letter to the editor on behalf of
zero experience.
Zero experience, yeah. So coming in with a fresh perspective on everything. We had breakfast, and so everything kind of fell in place, and and Peter and I we still keep in touch, and we went on to become actually very good friends, and we're still in contact. So we started up this paper. So it was I was given this blank canvas. We didn't have anything. We didn't have staff. We didn't have technology. It was just a complete startup from scratch.
But let's just put a little context on this. So this was going to be, do you have a name? Was it already going to be called? Was it the name?
There was no name. There was just this concept of a community weekly paper in.
Okay, but this community weekly paper was being owned and operated by, was this Southam?
It was, yeah, Southam, yeah. So the weekly, or the weeklies, because we were sister papers to the Waterloo Chronicle and the Cambridge Times and New Hamburg Independent. So there was already a family of community weekly papers under Southam locally. So we were going to be the last sort of piece of the puzzle for Southam locally. And we were, and the concept was that the record at that time would take the national advertising, the car companies, and all the
just for listeners, Southam owned the record as well.
Yeah, Southam owned the record. It had been, the Moats family had owned majority of the record up until '89, and they had sold their share to Southern. So Southern was the company, and of course the head of Southern was Conrad Black, who will appear later in the story. So this was Southern under Lord Conrad Black of Cross Harbor. Wait, or does he still that?
Yeah.
Does he still have that role?
Didn't he renounce his Canadian citizenship? Did he do that?
I must confess I don't follow Conrad Black very closely.
Me neither.
Yeah. So we were conceived at a time when ad revenues were quite robust, and the idea was that the Record, because it was a daily, would take the larger the larger national ads, and locally we would pick up the ma and pa stuff. So it would be the auto glass place, the flower shop, the small local businesses, because we would be more cost effective. Yeah. So that was the idea, but I think what happened, and again, there's kind of an ellipse to the story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and
yes.
And the end kind of started at the beginning. When we launched the economy between the conception of Kitchener This Week and the birth of Kitchener This Week, the economy had gone soft, and we ended up competing for the same advertising. So again, that's
so we won't. That's a foreshadowing. That's a foreshadowing. So let's get back to the beginning.
That's foreshadowing. Yeah. No, and I think what I want to say off the top too is that, and I should have said this earlier, that if I ever write a book or write a screenplay, this would be the subject of that book or that screenplay, because the story is just so compelling.
This weekly newspaper, there's enough lawyer shows and all that on fireman shows and doctor shows. We need a local weekly newspaper show. This would be fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's a great story, and the people that that I approached to be to work on the paper a lot of them were bigger than life, and it was a really an amazing group of people that came together for what was, I think, a very special newspaper.
Yeah, okay, that's okay. It sounds like our show's done, but anyway, let's get back to the beginning now.
Let's back to the beginning. Okay.
All the superlatives. So you have the dinner. They say, hey, we want you to do this. You're going to be the editor. Peter Winkler is going to be the publisher.
Yes.
Right. And Paul works for Southern. Is that, or the Fairway Group? Is that?
Yeah, Paul was the president of the chain of publications that they had at that time.
Yeah, and so they're saying, look, why doesn't Kitchener have a weekly? If all the other communities have weeklies, why isn't Kitchener, right?
Yeah. Well, I think up until that time, I think the feeling was that the Record was the weekly for Kitchener, like it was the paper. But I think at that point in time, a corporate decision was made to have a separate Kitchener focused newspaper.
So, okay. So you're the guy then responsible for putting this all together, or is it Peter, or what?
No, it was me. So I get, or on the editorial side. So just to sort of reiterate that I'd never done this before. So so they did a number of things, or did a number of things. One was I visited some of the top community weekly newspapers in Ontario, the Haliburton County Echo, the Oakville Beaver, the I think Shelburne Free Press. So I went and I talked to some of the people who had really done it well. So I was mentored by some of the best. I was trained on Quark Express, so because the part of the editor's job is actually to lay out the newspaper, which most of my former colleagues their eyes would roll, because I did the front part of it, but Mark Cripps, who was one of my team, had to come in and fix it afterwards. So so part of it was to be a part of the editor's role was to actually lay out the paper. So I was given training in a very sophisticated program called Quark Express, and again, I used to always joke later on that I knew enough to just make a mess, but I did do the front end of the paper, so that was good. But
let's talk about getting the people. So you did the tour, you saw these other papers. Was there, and then maybe you could tell me later if there's certain aspects of Kitchener This Week that you took from other people, from other papers, but talk about the people you started to gather, the team. This is like I think of the movie The Dirty Dozen, where they're out getting the team together.
Well, I think more of the movie The Commitments, where you're actually
yes
getting putting the band together. So we obviously we advertised for reporters. That was sort of the first order of march, and we and some very interesting interviews. You got some real characters. One guy who we didn't hire, was a master of disguise. It was pretty funny, but we ended up. One of the questions we asked in the interview was, because the bike gangs locally were in the news and all that, and how would you get a story from like on, the Satan's Choice or whatever. Like it was, how would you find that story? And that was interesting to see the response. But one guy, again, said he was master of disguise, and yeah, he didn't quite.
So he would infiltrate the choice then, eh?
Yeah, I thought, okay. So
I
that we
think
had
you
some
even hired him. He might have had a short lifespan.
yeah. But we ended up hiring some really good people. Mark Cripps, a local Kitchener boy, was working for the Godrich Signal Star, and I got Mark to come back and work for the Weekly, and we continue to be good friends. Mark actually is my son's godfather, so we,
Oh,
again,
wow.
we kind of.
Is he still in journalism or?
No, Mark, he works for the Insurance Bureau of Canada doing comms for them. So
Okay,
he's
right.
moved on. But so Mark Cripps was a fine. Mark did he took pictures, he did sports, and he was an award-winning journalist, which he never ceased to remind me of. So he was a very and a good guy. So Mark was
Award-winning before he came to see you or after he came to see you?
in order to get awards, you had to be in business or you had to put a paper out for a year. So we just didn't make it. So we got Mark. Tracy Morency, again, from Waterloo. We hired her. She's very talented writer and very lively. And so Tracy was on our team. There were some other folks. When Tracy went on mat leave, Dave Hilderly, we got from the Elmira Independent. So we had some really good people who had a good feel for the community. A couple other folks that we brought in, Lisa Malik, whose family was associated with the Record, was a photographer for us. She took pictures to augment the ones that Mark Cripps took, and Leanne Moses did entertainment. So we had a really good crew of folks that had good connections to the community, which helped us out.
Yeah, so there's like the team of reporters, but then you have a columnist. Is that a different group?
That was, yeah. So then I went out to get some people to write columns because obviously we wanted to have some lively opinions. And I was just out trying to find out who the best people would be. And I contacted my friend Terry Flynn, who at that time was the outgoing president of the KW Chamber of Commerce and quite high profile, as Terry doesn't do anything in a small way. And I phoned up Terry and I said, we're launching this paper. Any suggestions on who would be a good business columnist? And Terry said, what about me? Because he was wrapping up his time at the chamber. So I said, fantastic. So we had the, again, outgoing president of the Chamber of Commerce writing our business column.
Right.
I contacted Theron Kramer, who was probably the top community organizer, thinker locally, and somebody who, again, was a very successful community.
Yeah, I mean, Theron was so well known in the community. Yeah, he was. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and I phoned up Theron and I had asked the same question to Terry Flynn. Any suggestions on who would be a good columnist to write a community-based column? And Theron said, I'll do it. What about me? So I thought, great, my God, I had Terry Flynn and I had Theron Kramer as two columnists. And
Yeah.
then the person that I wanted to get, a couple others as well too, is Fred Rollman, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. He was a waiter at 20 King, and he was an unbelievably well-read, thoughtful, interesting, outspoken guy. So
He was a great waiter. I mean, if you wanted acerbic, if you wanted biting, cutting, he was a show in and of himself. He was fantastic.
Yeah, he was, and he was a very interesting guy. So I approached Fred, and just because I knew Fred, and he was an interesting guy, and he'd never written a column before, and he actually wrote some beautiful, beautiful columns. And so we had Fred Rollman, and then another person I knew for a few years, Catherine Hayes, a very talented writer. I got her to sort of join us as well to bring a kind of a feminist perspective to the paper. So we were fairly well-rounded there, but there was one piece of the puzzle that I had to get, which was Sandy Baird. And
Sandy Baird, like that
Sandy
is
Baird.
just we should have music. Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, exactly. Bigger than life. And Sandy Baird, for those people who have haven't been around this community for a long time, he was the long serving or long established editor of the Record. and he'd been around forever. In fact, he and his brother Harry grew up on Scott Street, and I believe the lore is that as young boys they actually delivered the record. So Sandy was a lifetime fixture in this community. He had written columns in the Record for decades, and he was, again, bigger than life guy. And after he retired from the Record, he wrote a column briefly there, but something didn't work out, and he ended up parting company with the Record, and he had a column in the Chronicle. So I was going to try to get Sandy to write a column for Kitchener This Week. So when I phoned, unlike my other people who volunteered, when I phoned Sandy and asked him to be a columnist, he declined. He said, "No, I don't have interest. I'm busy doing other things. I don't want to do 2 columns and all that." So
let me jump in here. Let me jump in here for a second, because you're calling Sandy. Bryan Stortz is calling Sandy Baird. Bryan Stortz and Sandy Baird had a little history.
Well, when I was running municipally, this is sort of we had various contacts. This was my first contact. When I decided to run for council way back when, I had didn't have time for, I'm trying to do the short version of the story, didn't have time to do a media release, but I had a kind of a draft brochure prepared. Richard Christie at that time was kind of off again, on again, running for mayor. So I was sort of in limbo. So I had a piece done up that was going to be my first launch piece, which looked a lot like the front page of the Kitchener Record. It was called the Center Ward Record. In fact, the designers that I got to do it just in a kind of a draft format lifted the entire front page of the Record. So that was a bit of
and what was it like? The banner was what? Stortz runs for Center Ward or something like that?
Well, it was the same font and everything. That it was the center, instead of the Kitchener Record or KW Record, it was the Center Ward Record, and it was all these glowing stories about what a great city councilor I would be. In fact, they even did a Ben Wicks cartoon. It was a complete knockoff.
You should have hired that writer, because that guy's a magician.
Yeah. So I gave I was at Richard's media conference when he announced for mayor, and I didn't have anything with me. Like the reporter asked me, "Are you going to run that?" And I said, "Yeah." Give a press release? No. Well, I do have this brochure which I just brought with me for whatever purpose. So I gave it to the reporter. He took it back to the newsroom. So about 2 hours later, I'm at home quietly doing something, and my phone rings, and it's Sandy Baird, and he is yelling at me. And I don't know if Sandy ever used profanity, but he was screaming, "You're nothing but a..." Sorry?
Yeah. Clearly he was familiar with profanity from your telephone call.
Yeah, I don't know if it was profanity or not, but because I don't want to put, Sandy was a pretty upstanding guy, but so I get the phone call, and it's, without even saying who it was, "You're nothing but a smart ass." I'm like, what? And then he would repeat, "You're nothing but a smart ass." And I have Sandy Baird screaming at me at the top of my lungs because he had gotten this thing, and he obviously thought we were trying to appropriate the records.
Yeah.
So anyway,
anyway, you got through that conversation, because I think you said you actually had shown it to someone, and then he kind of calmed down after.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, so I realized that I'd gotten some legal opinion on. Sandy was fine, and we kind of got past that, and I did make some changes to it to do it, but I was, but he, I can only imagine what it was like to be a reporter in his newsroom. He was, again, a bigger than life guy. So yeah, and then I dealt with Sandy a bit when I was on council, but
yeah. But so now you're calling him, and you're trying to get him to come work for your paper. You're not trying to poach him from the Chronicle, though, right?
No. We were sister papers. So I remember phoning Sandy back and kind of pleading a bit and trying to downplay it or whatever, trying to persuade him to actually change his mind. And then Sandy heard me out, and he said, "Yeah, I'll do it." He says he would still do the Waterloo Chronicle bit as well, but he says Waterloo's boring, so I'll do something on Kitchener. So we ended up landing Sandy Baird. We gave him page 3, which in a newspaper is sort of prime real estate, because we had somebody who was very much part of the fabric of this community for generations, anchoring the front end. So that put together we also had a couple other columnists in the back end, because I keep forgetting that we had news, we had opinion, but we also had sports, entertainment, and so on. So we actually had a wine columnist for us, Peter Pigeon, who was an internationally acclaimed wine writer, was a teacher at KCI. We got Peter to do a wine column from time to time, and he also was a a wine judge for amateur winemaking, and we let Peter, talk about what he enjoyed doing. So we had some really interesting columnists other than the opinion ones in the front end. And
well, I just want to say, when you mentioned the back end and the front end, I just took a quick look. I mean, this paper was like 24, 28 pages. It was substantial. I mean, I think the record now today comes in at about that, maybe. It's like, it's chock full of stuff. It's the news in here is not like, what's happening in Aurelia, the OPP reports from Aurelia. I mean, this is, and it's hard hitting and it's insightful stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah, no, I think we tried, but I also think too we were, I think we had a good heart, and I think it was fairly well done, because I think community weeklies tend to be a little more community oriented, and I think we fell into that model. Yeah.
Well, and I say hard hitting because when I take a look at some of the letters to the editor, like for example, Sandy was controversial, right? I mean, he wasn't. Okay. So did you feel a lot of heat from his columns, or what? Did you have to put the thumb on the scale at all, or what did you do?
No, not at all. I mean, Sandy had a style of writing that those who knew him were familiar with, and he had a lot of well-worn lines that he used to use. So no, I mean, we were just happy to get his column every week. And the other thing that Sandy did, and I heard
deadline Sandy or what?
I'd heard that that the record, one of the reasons that they didn't continue with him is that he couldn't write to length. Sandy was a consummate professional. That when we put his column into the hole that we had assigned for his column, it was written like right down to the last period. It was just like he was just a consummate professional. But no, we never had to. I mean, we quite enjoyed it. I mean, as a newspaper editor, getting letters, like, my God, like you loved letters to the editor, and if they were outraged or what. Terry Flynn was pretty good at getting letters for us as well.
I'm just gonna read you a couple of headlines here. So for Sandy, I just opened it up, right? There's one: reader gives Baird 2 cents worth. And then there's another one: Baird insulted firefighters all over the world. These are letters to the editor. And then I just see this one from Terry: don't be flim-flammed, says Kitchener This Week reader.
Well, yeah, and with Terry, we used to have a run sheet, and we would slug everybody's stories and all that stuff, and we'd have like different sort of unique descriptors. And with Terry Flynn, it was Flynn Flam. So we put that in. So we actually appropriated that for our laying out there. With mine, I wrote the editorials, and we used to call that the mini rant. So I would do an editorial every week, and it was, again, that was how we.
Okay, so you're the guy. All right, because I'm seeing one of your secret salaries unacceptable. Kudos to our local hospital.
Yeah. Well, we broke the original story on public sector salary disclosure, and we broke it in advance of it actually being released by institutions. We got them to give the information to us before it was public. So that's where, again, that was another interesting story.
Well, let me just touch on this. The political cartoonist.
Yeah,
that's the other part of the team. Talk about that.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. So one of the fixtures in a newspaper are your cartoons, and so we obviously wanted to have a local. This is going to be 100% local paper, so we wanted to get a local cartoonist. So Mike Inkall, whose dad was Bill Inkall, he was a sports guy for CTV forever. Mike reached out to me, and he said. He says, I'm a graphic artist. He says, I've done some political cartoons, but nothing that I've ever printed before. And would you be interested in a chat? So I said, fine, come on in, we'll talk. And Mike was not what I expected. He was a jock. He's a baseball player. He did not look, I don't know what a cartoon is supposed to look like, but so Mike came in, and he had a portfolio of cartoons, which were very good. And I said, fantastic. So Mike and I worked together over the year to come up with the ideas. And Mike had just a complete gift. He was an incredibly talented cartoonist. So he anchored our op-ed section with his cartoons. There was another cartoonist that we had who did a strip across the bottom, J.R. Artinger. It was called Civitas Waltz. And he, very thoughtful young man. he followed the issues fairly closely, but he used to go to council and watch the councilors interact, and he created little creatures, little animals for every member of council, and they would have these and other people as well, but for council and for like local elected officials, and he had Mike Harris, and he had a bunch of other people as well. So he had this little conversation, the strip that we had every week, which sort of talked about civic issues. So JR was again, another very talented cartoonist. So we were very lucky in that. Like, that was a very strong section for us.
Well, the on Inkle, yeah. I mean, when you look through these political cartoons, I mean, the artwork is fantastic. And just on that firefighter theme, I see one of them is a picture of Sandy Baird coming to the door, and there's two firemen, and one of them says, "Oops, I think we got the wrong house," and the other guy's dousing him with some water. So no doubt that was a hangover from the article or the editorial piece that Sandy wrote that offended the firefighters.
Yeah, well, we would always find something that was sort of newsworthy for the cartoon. So obviously, if the firefighters were all angry at Sandy, we would that would be a good idea to generate a cartoon.
So you weren't above poking a little fun at yourselves.
No, not at all. And Sandy had a good. I mean, like I think he like anytime I think he was he took it well. He never complained. And again, and I did have a chance to actually go to Sandy's house from time to time, pick up his cartoons, and from time to time he would invite me in, and I'd sit down with Sandy and his wife, and he was very I think eager to have company and chat. So we felt I think quite a good relationship.
Yeah. But on the Civitas Waltz, did you explain how he had like animal characters for the different politicians?
Well, yeah,
how did that come about? How did that come about, this concept?
I know, it was just his idea, and then he went and he watched counselors, and he assigned creatures to them. And I remember my friend Jeff Lawrence hated the character that he was assigned, which was a standard poodle, and it was kind of pruning and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And from time to time, Jeff would phone me up, or I'd see Jeff, and he'd say, "Come on, can you find something else? I don't like being a poodle," but it was good. So, and they had, I think, a pompous line for Richard Christie. Again, I looked at him for a while, but it was we had great.
Yeah, the lions with the chain of usually wearing the chain of office or not or something.
Well, yeah, and Inkle had always had former Mayor Richard Christie with the chain of office on, and if you look at it really carefully, on the identifying thing was Mickey Mouse. So he had a.
What was the Mickey Mouse? Was it like you would find that somewhere?
No. If you look at the chain of office, instead of the symbol being something civic like the city of Kitchener, it was Mickey Mouse. So
gotcha. That's the beauty of political cartoons. You guys were an awesome team. I mean, to put that sort of thing together, right? I mean, it's the little details that are so biting that you take a look at, and it can speak volumes.
Yeah.
Speaking of Mayor Christie, you mentioned to me one of the biggest stories that you kind of broke as a Kitchener this week.
Well, one of the first stories we got into was former Mayor Christie invited Lord Kitchener to come to Kitchener, and I guess he was kind of a third-rate, lord of some sort because of the Kitchener thing. So he came here, and then the controversy was that there was a reception at the Walper, and the source of funding for the reception was somewhat mysterious, and I believe the narrative was that it was paid for by some generous corporate donor, but it actually turned out it was being paid for out of the city's coffers through the clerk's office and whatever. So we got wind of it. These are the small things that gave us great fun. So we had this story that we broke the story that what Lord Kitchener and this whole thing, and Richard didn't really like it, and he phoned me up and expressed his displeasure, and I remember after the end of our conversation, I kind of hung up, and I realized that adage that don't annoy somebody who buys ink by the barrel. And I had a lot of access to a lot of ink, so that kind of set us down a certain path, and that's probably a lesson to all of it. Just remember that the people who put out newspapers or work in the media in general are people first and foremost, and to treat them well.
So what were some, like, what did you feel like your focus was? Obviously, because the name was Kitchener this week, your focus was Kitchener. You weren't looking at the region or anything else. Is that Kitchener City Hall was your wheelhouse?
Yeah, I'd say primarily we had a reporter assigned to cover council they went to all the meetings, but also we had we knew everything that was going on in City Hall. Like we had we may as well had a reporter sitting in caucus. Like we had a really good handle on what was going on there. So and that's where the stories were coming from. Like Kitchener was full of interesting stories, and I guess back to your comment about the paper that. This community, Kitchener, I can say because I really enjoy living here. Is full of interesting people, interesting stories. There was a lot going on, so that gave us, and I think that's what people wanted to read about. So we gave them what they were looking for, and there was no shortage of stories coming out. The other area that we covered a fair bit was the impact of the Harris government's cutbacks in that year, because when we were launched, it was at the time of the Common Sense Revolution, and there was
Right.
the days of action and the big protests and the OPSU strike. The OPSU offices were just around the corner from our office in downtown Kitchener. So whenever there was an incident on the picket line, people would come down and they'd tell us their stories and stuff. So so it was predominantly, again, it was Kitchener this week. We were focused heavily on City of Kitchener proper. It wasn't just City Hall too. It was neighborhoods. It was again, we were heavily into local sports, local entertainment. So again, I just don't want to make it sound like we just did the news part in the front. There was a whole other story. We told stories about like business stories when major changes happened, particularly in the downtown. We broke those stories first because we
Sure.
we had our ear to the ground.
But you're dealing with a time, like you mentioned, the Harris cuts are happening. John Sweeney was doing his review of whether there should be amalgamation or not, so to speak, right? I mean, that was certainly a controversial issue. So there are a lot of interesting stories that were going on around this time that just for the time you were operating. And then Richard Christie had just taken over from a long-running mayor, right?
Yeah.
Tom Cardillo was mayor, and then Christie, after many runs at it, finally won. And so there'll be a lot of interest around that, the new mayor.
Oh yeah, we had lots of great stories, and the council was interesting as well too. And there are some really interesting characters that gave us no shortage of great stories to cover.
Yeah, I mean, Morley Rosenberg was a councillor then.
No, Morley was long gone.
He was okay. Yeah, he was way before. Okay.
Yeah.
You've got Tom Galloway, Jeff Lorenz, Ziegler. Who else is on there?
Well, we had this new kid by the name of Barry Verbanovic, who was we had great fun with Barry.
I hope you put him through the grinder.
Yeah. So it was just an interesting time, and there was lots going on. The other area that we covered, I think we did well, was downtown Kitchener, and at that time, the local daily paper was sometimes could be a little hard on downtown, with some of the issues. And we were, because we were downtown. Our office was at 22 Frederick in the old City Hall building, and of course I'd been a downtown counselor and supporter for years. And I remember making my former boss Peter Winkler blush. We were guest speakers at the Market Square Business Association. They actually had, back when Market Square was fully occupied and it was going on, we were guest speakers there. And I remember getting up and saying that, this is where the editor tells you that, they're going to be impartial and they're going to cover the news as it comes in and blah, blah, blah. And I said, just let you know, we will be unapologetically pro downtown. We are going to tell, so it was like, we're not neutral. We're on your side, right? Place erupted. Peter's kind of going, oh my God, you're telling a room full of businesses that you're actually on their side. And we were.
You also dealt, the region smoking bylaw came through around that time, didn't it?
It did, yeah. And I flipped through some of the papers, and we were, so we were obviously, pro moving forward with the bylaw. The other thing that I looked at were we had a section it's called It's Debatable, and we used to bring in people from both sides of of an issue, and pro and con, and so we brought in people who again felt that we should move forward with this with the smoking ban, and people who were from the tobacco industry that felt that it's their God-given right to smoke in restaurants. So we let that debate play out, and I was surprised when I saw some of the old papers at how active that that community was. So they obviously and I think that mirrored the broader debate that was taking place at the regional level. So we again, that was one of the stories that that we covered and took a position on.
Well, and you had the speakers corner, which or was it called Speakers Corner, where you would go get views from other people, like man on the street, women on the street, comments on issues of the day?
Yeah, that was that's known. That's kind of a staple of newspapers called a streeter, and so we would go out and we would find people to we ask them a question and we would take their picture and put their put their picture and their name and their comments in the paper. And early on, that was one of the less desirable jobs to do, because people thought you're trying to sell them something, or you're just kind of weird because you had to stop people just at random in the street. So I used to early on, I would do that because it was one of those things that that nobody wanted to do. And early on, remember that nobody knew who we were because we were so new. So later on, when we had papers, I'd take a paper and I'd say, this is who we are. This is what we're going to do, and it got easier over time. But that was one of the staples, and we got some interesting comments, and it gave more people a spot in the paper, and they could cut it out and put it on their fridge or whatever people do with such items.
or the bird cage. So I was just looking through like the Christmas edition where you got season's greetings, and I see a young Barry Verbanovic and Jake Smola, right? Remember Jake Smola?
Oh yeah.
And John, right?
Yeah. No, we had some interesting counselors at that point in time.
What aside from that Lord Kitchener story, was there any other story that really stood out for you in terms of something that you had worked on while you were on the paper?
Well, a bunch of things, and again, I had to get my memory jogged. And one was the Will Ferguson. We told the story. We let Will Ferguson tell his story, unfiltered, about the way he was treated and so on. And it was reasonably sympathetic treatment of it. We lawyered it to death because of Will was still going through his challenges. So we did a big multi-page spread on Will Ferguson, where he was, how he was doing. So that was something that I saw
that because at first I thought, was that the start or the end, but it said 18 months after or whatever. So I thought that was very interesting because I mean, Will Ferguson was certainly a prominent character in our local political scene for a long time.
Yeah. So we let that Will tell his story, and it filled up a couple of pages. But we got no feedback on it, which was interesting because I thought, oh my, here we go, here come the letters, and it was silent. At the same time, we did a story on stuff sticking up the hill at Mount Trashmore, the McLennan Park, and how dangerous it was for people tobogganing. Well, that just got a huge reaction, and then and what I came to realize is that even though the Ferguson story was issued, it was interesting for some of us who were close to Will and so on.
Right.
Most people couldn't identify that with that, but a toboggan hill that was dangerous. Like a lot of people, it lit the place up. So it kind of lets like what you think in a newsroom is different than what the public really wants to hear about. So we did that. We did flipping through today the University of Kitchener. We did a story that was this far-fetched story of a bunch of academics that wanted to turn the former St. Jerome's High School into a university in downtown Kitchener. And of course, we were enthusiastically supportive of that, and it was Martin de Groot and Ed Priest and a bunch of those guys, and they were all academics, and they were sessional instructors, and they thought it would be a great idea to turn that into a university in downtown Kitchener. And lo and behold, years later, Wilfrid Laurier University has its School of Social Work in that very building. So some of the stuff that we did was prescient on things that would ultimately happen down the road. We did a lot of we tried a lot of coverage early on the days of protest on the related to the Harris government cuts, and we were highly, like, there was a big day of action in Kitchener. We had a reporter embedded with the organizers from 6 a.m. like all day long, and when the big mass group marched into downtown, the what's now Carl Zare Square, we had a reporter like right with them in the front. Like, it was quite cool, and so we told their story, and we were obviously very sympathetic to some of the issues that they were raising. So we did that. One of the fun stories we did, I think at the record they kind of wondered where these stories came from, and one of the fun stories we had was it was with now Mayor Urbanovic, and he knows I'm going to tell the story because he's told it lots of times. So there was under the Harris government, they allowed municipalities to recoup the cost of services like policing that related to certain businesses. And I heard on CBC one morning of a gentleman who I knew, Mike Bradley, mayor of Sarnia. In Sarnia, they were going to go after the banks for policing ATMs in downtown Sarnia. So I phoned Mike up, had a good chat because I knew him, and I thought, here's a great story. Why doesn't Kitchener do this? So I contacted Councillor Urbanovic, or the rookie councillor from the Stanley Park area, and I planted the seed. And of course, Barry ran with it. And then for the next couple of weeks, the bank industry was sending in their lobbyists to speak against it, and it was just this great thing. And it gave us this great story. And ultimately, we did one of our funniest cartoons was Councillor Urbanovic wearing this little kid cowboy outfit with a little hat and a whistle and little guns and little, dressed up as a little kid in a cowboy suit, standing in front of an ATM going, "Stick 'em up." It was beautiful. And I'm sure Mayor Barry has that framed somewhere, either in his office or in his home. So those are the kind of stories that we kind of we discovered, and it created great interest.
So how long did your paper last till?
It lasted until, I have to look at the last one here. It lasted
until. When was the first one? What was the first date?
The first one came out on October the 4th, 95, and the last one was the 31st of July, 96. So it was this is the anniversary, more or less. I guess tomorrow would be the anniversary of the demise of Kitchener this week.
That's a pure coincidence.
It was, yeah, no, it was, it was a lot. Every week was another, it was a lot of fun. And we did some, hard news too, but there was a tragic fire on Century Hill Drive. 4 children died. We had because the fire was on our deadline, so we were able to send a reporter out, get some pictures, and we ultimately, after very spirited discussion within our newsroom, and it was just sort of my direction, we put a small story on front, and we put the picture inside, because the picture was quite sensational. It was the burnt house with a play set and a doll, and or whatever it was. The picture was would have been, it was powerful, but it would have been disturbing, and that's who we were. Like, it was, again, and then later on, I remember we had a woman who for exercise used to have a paper route for Kitchener This Week, and and she knew the family, and when we were, again, when it was clear that we were no longer, she came in and she said, when I saw that story, I realized that you could have played it differently, and I thought the way you handled it was very sensitive and thoughtful, and you said your paper had a good heart, which I think we did.
Yeah. So that's and I mean, that story obviously touches you because you've remembered it, and it really, I guess, summed up really the focus. You're like a newspaper focused on the community, but you're thinking about the community. It's not all about just selling papers.
Yeah, no. In that case, it was a day to be sensed. I remember telling, after our spirited discussion, my final word to our group was, "This is a very sad day. Let's go home."
Yeah. Let me ask you something. So just bring it back to the political focus for a second here. When politicians, get a call from the dreaded reporter, to ask a few questions or something like that, given your experience in communications, your experience with the media now as a former editor and as a politician, So you cover all the gamuts. Any tips, advice that you would pass on in how you should conduct yourself in those situations for
Yeah,
budding politicians?
yeah, no, just a couple thoughts. I think first of all, be accessible. That and remember that reporters do have deadlines. So make sure that you're understanding what they need and give it to them. And again, and being accessible is pretty important. I think be honest. I think that if you say something that's incorrect, your credibility, you lose it forever. So I think that be truthful and try not to overspin issues, because that sometimes comes back to to haunt you, and it doesn't always enhance your credibility. I think developing a relationship with journalists, and maybe from time to time send them a quick email or on something, and it's a long game, and you want to have a good relationship with a journalist, whether it's TV, radio, print, whatever, for the time that you do need it. So I think it's being proactive in developing those relationships. And I think the other part is, be quotable. That if you want to get quoted in a story or whatever, I give the journalist something that's worth putting in that story. And I know from my own experience and from being at the region that two politicians can say the same thing, and it's the one who says it the best that gets quoted. So I think remember that a quotable soundbite is pretty important. And then my final comment would be, don't complain. That if you don't like a story, and this was the same rule that I applied to myself when I was at the region, that again, reporters are human. They to constantly be sort of bitched at because you don't like what they wrote doesn't help. And I think that, if there's error in fact, you can get that corrected, but just not liking what somebody says. And it's I know of like legendary folks who no matter what you said about them, they would say that was the best article ever. And again, I think you got to develop a bit of a thick skin, and complaining doesn't get you anywhere.
And I guess the one final thing I'll add is the reporter didn't create the headline.
No, they're written by somebody else. Just back to Kitchener this week, our headlines were awesome, and they were usually funny and punny and whatever. You can probably find some of them there. And that was usually, and we actually had I can't say I wrote all of them, but between my team and Mark and others, we would come up with very sort of very funny headlines to get people to actually want to read the story. So that was one of our things were clever headlines.
I see. I was looking at your last paper on the Speaker's Corner, and its question is, what's your reaction to the demise of Kitchener this week? And you only selected all the sad ones, not the people that were jumping for joy. I don't see any local politicians. I don't see the mayor jumping for joy.
Rob, everybody was sad. Actually, to the credit of former Mayor Christie, he actually wrote a letter to Conrad Black, I guess, at the end, asking that they reconsider the decision to can the paper. And somewhere downstairs in one of my boxes of junk from years ago, I actually have a letter, a response from Conrad Black back to the mayor of Kitchener, explaining why they did what they did. So actually, our demise went right up to.
The listeners are hearing all these great things about the paper. So you're saying, well, why did it end? Why did it end?
We were in a very competitive arrangement with the Record for ad revenue. That's basically the long and short of it. And it ended up in a very very difficult time on the ad side. On the editorial side, we ran rings around them, but on the ad side, it was tough. So we ended up losing. The Kitchener This Week lost about $500,000 over the 10 months or so that it was in existence, and it was. This is sort of the subject of this could be a discussion for a full episode. There was a highly contentious relationship between us and the Record over ad revenue, and them going after our advertisers and hurting all the other papers as well. It wasn't just hurting us; it was hurting the Chronicle, it was hurting the Cambridge Times, it was hurting the entire family of papers. And at the end of it all, Southam decided that they either had to get rid of the record or get rid of us. And I've always joked that maybe, years later, they probably might want to rethink what they did, but that was 25 years ago.
Right.
But no, it was a very difficult, and it was tough, and we were trying to, lower costs. I mean, I was being groomed to take over as publisher and be joint publisher editor to try to, lighten up on salaries. Peter was going to go back to Cambridge and all that. So we were trying to do what we could to lower costs, but we were in a very competitive situation with we were part of the same family. They were part of the daily division at Southam. We were part of the weekly division at Southam. We were part of the same company, and we were just again, it was very difficult, a very difficult time.
So it just came down to the unfortunate economic realities of trying to keep the weekly going, and you weren't a subscription based. You were what do you call that when you're not subscription? You just distribute to everybody.
Yeah, no, it was it's called a TMC, Total Market Coverage paper. So we went to every household. I think we went to like 53,000 households, which was a big deal. We did have a voluntary pay thing, but that didn't produce a lot of money. So
how was your relationship with the city of Kitchener at the end? Even though you say Richard wrote this letter, what about the advertising side?
Yeah, well, it was complex. I mean, for whatever reason, down the stretch, the city of Kitchener decided that they did not want to advertise in our paper, and so they determined that we weren't a real newspaper because we weren't paid, and so the Record pulled their statutory ads from the paper down the stretch, which was really made it difficult for us because that was something that we really needed as a revenue source, and that did not help. That really kind of pushed us down the stairs. We engaged a prominent local lawyer, Mark Somerville, to do a major or extensive legal opinion on it, which basically said this doesn't make sense. The city of Cambridge advertised in the Cambridge Times, the city of Waterloo advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle. City of Guelph advertised in the Guelph Weekly. Every other municipality in Ontario put their money into their local weekly paper because it was more cost effective and reached more people. Except here, for whatever reason, it's still a mystery to me, Kitchener pulled their ads on us, which so I'm not going to point any fingers, but it was really unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, listen, Bryan, I mean, just brief journey down memory lane on Kitchener this week just solidifies my view that whatever you're involved in, and regardless of, that provincial campaign where you didn't win, and that really wasn't in your control because, a lot of things happen at the leadership level that we just can't control. But you did a fantastic job with this paper. And again, I encourage anyone to get out there, get to the library, take a look at this publication. There are great stories. It's just a great walk down memory lane for anyone from the KW area. And I want to congratulate you. Even though it was a brief run, it was a bright run, and you should be congratulated along with your team that you put together.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah, it was a great team. Thank you.
Yeah. So this has been another edition of the Old Grey Mares podcast. I want to thank you for having listened and tagged along with us. Thanks again. All the best.